Welcome to Legalized Negligence, where we talk about Florida Statute 768.21, subsection 8. I've got a special guest today, my good friend Missy Ball, and she's going to actually kind of help me walk through where I'm going with all of this work that I've been doing over the past year, or well, really over the last 6 months since the Florida legislature went out of session. Um, Missy, I'm going to just start out by kind of explaining what happened at the end of the session because we've already done videos on that. And if you got any questions that come up along the way, let me know. Or if I think of something that I need to get some input from you, I'll just ask you and
Okay.
we'll just kind of see where it goes. As we all know, that the legislature did not pass any bills to repeal subsection 8. They acted like they were going to, and I'm really kind of disappointed in several of them who had promised that something would be done and then ask us for input. And when we provided the input, they didn't respond. And it just kind of fell on the floor, and nobody really knows exactly what happened. Uh, I have tried to reach out to several of them and ask them to do podcasts with me. Only one of them has, a representative, Anna Escamani, and she was kind enough to come on and talk to us and give us her views on it. Senator Yarborough hasn't responded. I even had one lawmaker block me from his Facebook page, and I had to file an ethics complaint against him last week. But so nothing happened with it. So here we are moving towards within the next couple of weeks or so, maybe a month, the delegation meetings are going to start happening where your local representatives and senators all get together and they give you 1, 2, or 3 minutes to tell them what your issue is and what you would like them to do about it. Uh, Over the summer, I have been writing a presentation that I plan to get into all of the lawmakers' hands by the time the session begins. I think it's January. Um, I'm breaking it down into 3 sections because it's rather long. To my initial thought was, you've got lawmakers who are brand new. You may even have some, because this is a year that they would vote for House members, and some Senate members are up for reelection as well. So you may have some that have never heard of this at all. You may have some that have been there long enough to hear about it, but haven't been involved in any of the votes. You may have some, like Representative Lopez, who was and Senator Book, who has actually written legislation, but though it never got passed. So it's at all different levels. So I am writing up something that explains the history of how we got to subsection 8 and when it was passed in 1990. Then the next section of it will be the legal challenges that came along, the various cases where it was challenged in court, and how the opinions that the courts held on those cases. And then the final section of it, which I want to put into their hands right about the time they start their session next year, so it'll be fresh in their mind, is how do we remedy this? You know, the people have patiently waited for 35 years for a legislature to act, and they haven't. And I think I would even say recklessly haven't acted. They put on a great dog and pony show and pat you on the head, make you feel like they're going to do something. But this past year, we got it where several of them recognized that the law was unjust and said that in meetings. So if something is unjust, then it seems to me that the legislature would have a responsibility to do something about that. And I am trying to get people to get involved to do something about that. Probably the biggest struggle that I've had is getting advocates involved. Um, I know I'll probably upset some people by saying this, but this is not a seasonal sport. You don't just get involved when they go into session, because that's when they limit your time. That's when they limit what you can say and how long you can say it. We saw this past session, there was a fellow that started saying something that the people in the committee thought was disparaging towards a past lawmaker, and they shut him off and said, "You will not speak about him that way." Well, I look at it like I've had the past 10 months to do something about it. You know, they went out of session in March. I have from then until they go back into session to talk to them, to email them, to write them, to call them on the phone, to meet with them in person. I have plenty of time to get my point across to them. And then if they don't want to act, I view it as, well, I've put you on notice. You know, you can't say that you don't know about this, because I have proof now that I've provided it to you and you know the issue. So, um, I tell you, Missy, this thing is so multifaceted. It's hard to find a spot to jump in and start talking about it. You know, it's no matter what, where you jump in, there's always stuff you needed to say before that. It's just this real cycle. But the point that I am trying to get across to lawmakers is we need to start viewing medical malpractice differently than we have been in the past. In the past, we have all looked at the medical profession as this benevolent, caring profession. And because of that, we hold back. We don't ever want to say anything bad about doctors. But what if we started to look at it as a high risk profession? Okay. Now, I wish I could claim that as an original thought, but I've never had original thought my entire life. I just recently learned about this way of thinking, and it came from an astronaut of all people. This guy was he was an engineer and an astronaut, and he began to apply the principles that NASA uses to solve problems. And they look at space flight and aviation as high risk professions. So he turned that thinking to the medical profession. And the point he made is that if you view this as a high risk profession, you don't point fingers of blame, you look for solutions.
Mm.
And you can go like down 100 rabbit holes with that. But what it does is starts to make you think in a different way. And once you start to think in a different way and you learn how to remove the emotion from your thought process, because you're never going to solve this if there's too much emotion. Now, I'm not saying that the emotion doesn't come into it at some point, but imagine being able to sit down with a couple of doctors, a couple of nurses, some people from the insurance companies, some legislators. Uh, you know, you get this whole group of what they refer to as the stakeholders. I know what that term means. I just hate that it's applied to a topic like this. It just seems to take the humanity out of it. Um, but if you could just sit down and say, guys, we got a problem to solve. We have doctors saying they can't afford their malpractice insurance. The state seems to be concerned that if they can't afford their malpractice insurance, they're going to leave the state. The insurance companies are saying the jury awards in medical malpractice cases are too high. The people are saying we lost a loved one due to somebody's negligence and we want to be compensated for that. So you got all these different points of view. And if you go, well, if this is what's on the table in front of me, and we all agree that we want to solve the problem, then how do we go about it? You know, we can't just keep saying, well, that doctor was negligent, or the legislature saying, we can't afford to lose doctors. We need more. You know, quit thinking of just your own stake in this game and start thinking of everybody else's stake and work together. One of the interesting points that this fellow was talking about And this will take a minute to explain it, but I just absolutely love this. I believe it was a hospital in Kentucky. They had hired this guy to come in and help them revamp the way the hospital deals with medical malpractice claims, because they did that because they wanted to provide better patient care. They weren't trying to weed out the bad doctors. They were trying to get the community and the doctors in the hospital to work together. So there were several cases, but I'll talk about just one of them because they handled them all the same. This young man died due to a doctor's error, and they invited, let me get this straight, they invited the family in to sit down and talk with the hospital staff, including the people involved in the incident. And the family member said, the moment we walked into the door, even before we got seated, they began to apologize. And they owned their mistake. They said, here's the mistake we made, here's how we made it, and you are due some type of compensation. Now, we're here to talk about how to make all of that happen. And it put the people back so far that somebody finally admitted what happened. They told the hospital, we don't want your money. We wanted accountability. We wanted somebody to say, we made a mistake. It wasn't intentional. It was human error, but a life was lost due to our human error. And the point in all of that was to start thinking of it in a different way. See, they didn't enter this conversation trying to point a finger. They entered it trying to solve a problem. And they all agreed, and now I can't remember exactly how this came up. I think it was the family that said this. They said the best way to honor our son's life is to make this change in the way that you perform your surgeries or whatever, because giving me some money isn't going to bring him back. Giving me some money isn't going to make the doctor change his ways. Whatever the cascade of problems was that caused the malpractice, unless you address it. So the best way to honor our son's life is to tell us how you're going to fix the problem. And I thought, that's pretty profound. And it went along with what I had read earlier this year about the way they handle medical malpractice cases in Japan. They have that whole culture over there of saving face. They ain't like Americans. We want to sue, do anything to us and we want to take you to court. Over there, they're more concerned about the better good of their society. And that's where the whole saving face thing comes in. And they do the same thing. When a negligence has occurred, they step right up and they admit it. And they tell and what they have found is that few people want to sue. There are all kinds of stats that you could look at, and I could throw out a whole bunch of numbers, but the fact is fewer people want to sue because somebody stood up and said, I caused that to happen and I'm sorry, and here's what I'm going to do to fix it.
And the betrayal trauma is what often has more impact, driving the wanting justice in only a financial sort of way. That this apologizing, admitting, not covering up, that's part of where the even more significant wound often is.
Yeah, and I've heard so many, it happened to me when my mom died, and I've heard so many other people over the past 4 years tell me the exact same story. The moment that I asked a question that raised a concern in the hospital's mind, that I might be considering a lawsuit. They circled the wagons, they brought in the attorneys. The nurses said, I can't speak to you about that anymore. It's like immediately this wall gets built, and you're standing there, whether your loved one has passed away yet or not, they might still be alive. You're standing there trying to understand what happened. Nobody will talk to you. You got, an army of lawyers ready to attack you. And it's just all that does is cause even more suspicion. You wouldn't be mounting such a defense if you didn't have something to hide.
It takes it to that adversarial process
Absolutely, it
instead of
does.
let's find a solution.
And in the long run, it helps the hospital because they don't get as much bad press. In fact, they'll start getting good press. Somebody will say, and this is an oversimplification. Yeah, my mother died of medical malpractice, but the hospital admitted what happened. They worked with me. They did everything that, kind of like it's a horrible example, but it's the only one that popped into my mind. You make reservations to go somewhere and you get a really bad hotel room and the services, but the people step up and make up for it. Same thing, same idea. Um, the hospital's going to have to start doing that. The doctors are going to have to start doing that. The trade off that we're going to have to give to them is, and in some cases, before people jump down my throat too much, in some cases there needs to be some monetary compensation here, and that's really going to depend on a lot of factors, and I think every case needs to be looked at differently. Here's one example. Travis and his mother had a very close relationship. They saw each other every week. They went out to dinner every week. She was still very much a part of his life all the time. My mother was not that my mother and I had a bad relationship, but we lived in different states. We only talked occasionally. She wasn't nearly as active as Travis's mom, so she wasn't as interactive. Um, so right there, you have some differences. Well, then throw in, there was a case that happened a couple of years ago. Young 25-year-old woman dies who, she was just starting her life. She was engaged. She hadn't yet married. Well, imagine the toll of not having that daughter around for the next 50, 60 years or more. So every case I think it would have to be looked at differently. What happens when the estranged son or the estranged parent finds out that somebody just died and hadn't seen him in years? Should that person be compensated? So to prevent people from taking advantage of the system, I just think we have to be fair about it and evaluate each case as it comes along. And yeah, you look at a case like Travis, and yeah, there should be some emotional pain and suffering compensation. Absolutely. He was planning a trip with his mom. They were going to get on a sailboat. And Travis taught me something. The eastern half of the United States is an island. I didn't know that until I met Travis. He showed me how the way the waterways go, the eastern half from the Mississippi over is actually an island. And he wanted to get a sailboat and they were going to travel around the eastern half of the United States. I didn't have any plans like that with my mom. She was 92. She couldn't have done anything like that. But it doesn't negate the fact that a nurse was negligent. And if you're going to solve the problem, you got to call her out on that. And you got to do something to impress upon people's mind that you can't become apathetic and cause a death. Society will not accept that. Does that make sense?
And to cover it up.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because that's what they do. And that's another thing that both Travis and I have been dealing with, trying to get records from the hospital. We both initially got a set of records that we thought were complete. You know, he requested his, I requested mine. We had asked for everything, and then we discover now that we didn't get everything, and we're trying to get the hospital to give us the rest of the records. And in my case, they're just lying to me saying, oh, we don't maintain those. And of course, I respond and say, well, you know, it's a federal law that says you have to. And we don't maintain those, and we're not going to talk to you about it anymore. In Travis's case, he's requesting to go down and actually look at the records at the hospital, and they're giving him a big runaround. So it's like, here we are. I'm 4.5 years after the fact. He's 5.5 years after the fact, and we're still can't get straight answers about anything. So you talk about a cover up. Yes. And then trying to get the legislature to understand what you go through simply because you can't get your day in court. Let me take a sip of this Mountain Dew, and then I'll talk about your day in court. I told you there's a lot of facets to this, Missy.
There are.
One of the questions
and I hope today that we tap into what are some of the things people can do to begin with.
Yeah. And I'll get to that. What I'm trying to do is throw out some stuff, because I'm going to send a link to this podcast to all of the legislators that I've been talking to. I want them to listen to it on their drive back home, listen to it, you know, some evening or whatever. But it's more than the minute that I would get to speak at a delegation. You know, I want them to hear all these different facets, because it gives them something more to think about. Your day in court, you know, the only thing that a civil court can do is give you what's called injunctive relief. They can either make the other party do something or stop the other party from doing something. That's called injunctive relief. Or they can give you monetary relief. Okay. Well, everybody that wants subsection 8 repealed means that these are people who want to be able to get into civil court. So, what is it that you're asking the court to do? Are you seeking an injunctive relief? Because that court can't remove that doctor's license. The Department of Health has to do that. So, it must be monetary damages that you want to get. Well, I also hear you say that it's not about the money. If it's not about the money, then why do you want to go to civil court? And if it is about the money, exactly how much money is it about? Now, I know a lot of people will get angry with me for being that blunt about it, but you have to ask yourself those questions. Exactly how much money would remove your pain and suffering? Because I can tell you, for me, zero. I mean, you could give me $1 or you could give me 10 million, and it's still going to upset me that my mom died in the manner that she died. So it's not about the money for me. What I want is for the legislature, who is in charge of the administrative agencies, to go in and turn the Department of Health on its head and figure out why more doctors are not being held accountable, because that's the agency that can do that. They have in Florida what's called a 3 strikes law. If a doctor, at least the way the law is worded, if a doctor is found negligent and has committed malpractice 3 times, his license is pulled. Travis and I have found doctors that have had 19 counts and they're still practicing medicine, and everything in between. They don't do it. The Department of Health licenses doctors that come into the state from other states where they've had their licenses pulled or suspended or have medical malpractice cases pending against them. The Department of Health is just another out of control agency that is not doing what it was designed to do. The people that you talk to there are nasty. They completely dismissed me because I questioned one of their lawyers. And so they just told me, we're done talking to you. Simply because this lawyer who went to some law school, if you could call it that, um, wasn't very polite to me. So getting back to what is it that you want in civil court, you've got, you got to be honest with yourself and decide that. Ask yourself that question and say, what is it that I want to get? Or is my time and energy better focused on getting the legislature to do something with the Department of Health, where when negligence occurs, that doctor is taken to task for it?
That there is that accountability and someone is acknowledging the wrong.
Yeah, that's the whole thing. Now maybe you could get that satisfaction from the civil court if a jury in a civil court hears the case and says, yes, we believe this doctor committed medical malpractice. Maybe that's enough to satisfy your desire that he was held. It was recognized by the people, by the community, by the jury, that this doctor committed malpractice, but it's still up to the Department of Health to remove his license. So maybe there's a way to bring those two things together. If he's found guilty in a civil case, maybe that automatically gets trans, moved over to the Department of Health. However, the in a civil case, you only have to have a preponderance of evidence, where in the Department of Health, because you're talking about taking away a man's livelihood, by removing his license, you have to prove clear and convincing. So, and it's like from 51 up to 75. There's a tremendous amount of difference there. But if you're guaranteed that it can at least go, if you win your case in civil court, maybe you can be guaranteed that you can skip some steps in the Department of Health and go straight to the Board of Medicine and let that board decide what's going to happen, and not just these little $3,000 and $4,000 and $7,000 fines, something substantial that other doctors and nurses look at and go, wow, the state's serious about this kind of thing.
Right.
And that will make the people feel like our lawmakers, our government is listening to us, because we're ultimately responsible. I had a conversation with a guy earlier today, and I said, look, I don't care what argument you throw at me about what your government has done wrong. I am always going to come back with, then why did you elect them? You're responsible for it. It may not be your representative or your senator, but you have the power to persuade your neighbor to vote differently, to sit down and have these conversations. But unfortunately, we live in a society where people say you don't talk about religion and government. And I think those are the two most important topics you can talk about in life, is religion and government. One deals with your soul, the other deals with your time on earth.
Yeah.
But anyway. Sorry about that. I got a little bit of a frog in my throat. Well, Missy, has anything I said so far made any sense? I feel like I'm kind of just rambling a bit.
I think that the education that you're giving us today is really powerful, because I don't think that most of us understand the thing about what civil court can do or not do, what our choices are, what are some things for us to think about and to consider how we want to respond if something like this happens to us or a loved one. So I think that being educated to just how it does work currently, how it does work or not, and what are some of the solutions, because I hear just in what is where things are fraught with problems in the way something is set up.
Mhm.
And it's also challenging us as individuals to understand our own power, our own accountability, whether it is in our voting, whether it's in how we hold people in positions of power or positions of um, uh, like the Department of Health and such. We have some choices, and there's some responsibility in terms of our actions, and that it is hard when we're grieving the loss of a loved one. It's hard to take that really um, logical and effective action. It takes a while to get into that space. Um,
Yeah. And see, I think, man, then this next part I could talk about for weeks because I love this stuff. Our founders expected us, when America was created, our founders expected us to be as enthusiastic and passionate and involved in government as they were. They just fought a revolution. And it was like they were still electrified about breaking free from, a monarchy and becoming uh, a nation that governed itself. And it was, I can sometimes, I try to imagine what it must have felt like living in that period. You know, it'd be like winning the biggest battle of your life and coming out of it victorious. So the people back then were more involved. And over time, for a number of reasons, we are not as involved anymore. It comes down to virtue signaling by getting a little sticker that says, I voted, and now um, you feel like you've done your part and you don't have to be involved in it anymore. And that's not the way that it was designed. It was designed so that you were involved daily. You were constantly watching what's happening in the news. What are they doing in Washington, or what are they doing in Nashville, or what are they doing in Tallahassee? We were supposed to stay involved in it, but we simply don't anymore. The schools for decades have not taught civics. You ask a person today how government is supposed to function, and they don't have an idea. Most of them can't even tell you the president's name. Um, there's a line, I don't know if you've heard, that you probably have, you read a lot, where after the Constitutional Convention was over and the Constitution was written and they all come out of the building, some woman asked Ben Franklin, so what kind of government do we have? And he said, a republic, if you can keep it. And some people say that he may or may not have said that. I don't care if he did or didn't. It's a really good lesson. If you can keep it. And what he meant by that was you've got to remain diligent. You can't just turn this over to somebody you elected. Would you, create a business and hire some managers and never check in on them?
right.
No, you're going to walk through every once in a while and make sure that they're doing what you want them to do. Well, that's the same way that we're supposed to do it. We are supposed to tell them how we want to be governed. And our constitutions, whether federal or state, are designed that way. So when our society changes, we can make a change in our law to reflect what we want. And I know a lot of people don't like Antonin Scalia, a Supreme Court justice that died a few years ago. And there's some things about him I don't like either. But he said something in an interview one time. They were talking about Roe v. Wade, and everybody always gets all worked up about Roe v. Wade. And he said, look, if you want a law that outlaws abortion, then go out, talk to your neighbors, persuade them to your way of thinking, and get together and contact your lawmakers and have them write a law. Don't send that to the Supreme Court to decide whether or not America should, be anti-abortion or not. In other words, get involved. You get your neighbors and your fellow citizens involved. And you have to do that. I believe that the government, when they took over education, they intentionally dumbed it down. They don't want us to think. I mean, what kind of ruler would try to educate you to the point that you would be able to not let them control you, you know? But if you say that too loud, you're viewed as some kind of nutcase. But that's exactly how you read any of the writings at the founding, and that's exactly what they expected. They expected us to be an educated bunch of people, and they expected us to be active. And like I said at the beginning, that's the biggest hurdle that I can't get over is trying to get people to get active.
And it's part of the responsibility of having the right to vote. They are representatives, and that assumes that means they are listening to someone. And if there's a crickets in terms of hearing what we want, and that it's well thought out, well researched, etc., that that's our part of the equation.
Yeah, and some lawmakers will tell you, I want to hear from my constituents, but nobody is telling me what they want me to do here. And I think those are some genuine lawmakers. They really do want to hear. But when the people are too busy out on the lake or at the beach or whatever it is they do with their free time, and they're not talking to their government, then what's the legislator left to do except what he thinks might be best? And he may not be as well informed on it. I guarantee you. Missy, in the past year, I have read no less than 24 books on medical malpractice, not to mention the court cases and the lectures and the documentaries. And I think I'm fairly well versed on the subject right now. Certainly not as much as, a malpractice attorney or a lawmaker, but most of these people that go into the legislature, they're not attorneys. Not that you have to be with the, let me try to say that a different way. They may be a business owner of sorts, and they want to, let's say that since we're talking about Florida, let's say that they own a business that makes boats. Well, what do they know about medical malpractice? But they want to run for office because they see something in the boat making business that needs to be addressed. So they run for office and they get elected. But then when this issue of medical malpractice lands on their desk, what do they do with it? They don't know anything about it. So it's up to us to educate them and tell them about that. Now, on occasion, and there are some doctors in the legislature, they do know this particular issue. They may not be very helpful when it comes to an environmental concern or some labor issue somewhere, but they certainly know this one. But that's why it's important that people stay involved with their government. And that's, like I said a minute ago, that's where my biggest obstacle has been, is getting people to get involved.
We have to be educated, but we have to know how to help educate others on a topic that we're passionate about that they may not be passionate about. How do we speak in a language that makes them at least curious?
Yeah, and most of the way that advocates have done that is to point out, look, at any moment you could fall under this law. Your spouse could pass away, and suddenly you're a widow or a widower, and your children are grown. Well, guess what? You just now fell under subsection 8. You know, um, would you want your 26-year-old, since this law takes effect when they turn 25, would you want your 26-year-old to be able to bring a case against a hospital or a doctor? Well, of course you would. So how do you get them in?
Connecting the dots for the
Yeah.
audience you're speaking to.
Yeah. And, maybe it's just my lack of ability to know how to motivate people that way. Maybe that's not the area that I'm good in. And I don't know how to attract people who are good in that to get people involved. I think we all have some skill to bring to the table. It's like right now, I want to get a website built, and I'd be great if somebody in the community would say, I know how to build websites. I'll help you with that. Or if there was somebody who's really good at public speaking, or if there's somebody who's really good at making flyers or whatever, we all have something we can do. I'm passionate about researching law. I love doing that. Well, then let me do that kind of thing and let the other. But if we could all come together and work, and form a coalition, an army, whatever you want to call it, working towards the same thing, the legislature would see, wow, these people are really starting to do something here. Where instead, last year you had people bickering about whose name was going to go on the bill. Well, they're going to name it after this person's loved one. Well, that's not fair. They should name it. I just think that's silly. It's a waste of time and energy. And, you could have read a court case during the time you argued about that.
Yeah.
You could have written a letter or done something else. And I don't know how to pull people together like that. It's just not anything I'm good at. But
Well, you're doing a really important service by beginning to educate more people of what the issue is, having compassion that this experience sometimes turns out in the way that you've described, and what can each of us do to make a difference, to help find solutions.
yeah, I mean, I've 2 or 3 times now, I've uh, done, I don't know what to call it, like an open Zoom where, just write to me. I'll send you a link. We'll all meet at 7 o'clock on Saturday night and just talk. Nothing, you know, it is absolutely depressing. Me and Travis will do a podcast. I'll upload it to YouTube. I'll post it in the Facebook group. Go back and look at it a few days later. 5 people have looked at it. Like, I thought you lost a loved one. You
Yeah.
know, I, I thought you were sad and and you were hurt and you wanted to do something about that. Why aren't you taking that link and spreading it, sending it to everybody and asking that? I mean, I'm not making any money off of this. I'm not monetized, as they say. I just want people to hear about this issue and become aware and get involved in talking to their lawmakers to say, hey, we have had our rights violated long enough, and the solution that the 1990 legislature put into place has not solved this problem. You keep telling me that doctors are leaving the state when the statistics from the Department of Health tells me that they're not. Now, I want to know why this law is still in place.
Great question.
You know, um, I don't know. I'll probably run off the few people that have watched my podcast, but even if they do, I don't care about that either. It's not going to stop me. I'm going to keep talking until I can't talk anymore. And at least when I go out, I can say I tried. I gave it everything I had.
Absolutely.
And
And you have the gift of the educational aspect of this and the tenacity and the passion.
well, you know me well enough to know that I don't like being told what to do, number one. But the education part of anybody can get that.
No, you've got you go through reams and reams of information and have the ability to bring it down to understandable language, because it's meant to um, the way some of that stuff is written is is not for the general public.
Yeah, but again, and I appreciate you saying that. That was kind, but the point is, until you start reading a bunch of those, it's like they used to. Nora told me one time the way that you train to walk the Appalachian Trail is you go out and start walking. And
Yeah.
yeah, the first day's a struggle, and the next day's a struggle, but a little less, and the next day a little less. And after a couple of weeks, you're walking the Appalachian Trail. Well, it's
But
just
some
simple.
people need kind of the cliff notes first to have a container to put all of the minutia in. So your style of educating is very helpful to people like me, that it makes sense how you're talking about that. So now I have a container so I can look at the minutia.
Yeah. Well, again, thank you, but that comes from uh, absorbing it. I mean, doing it. Just the anything. The more you do it, the more you practice it, the more you start working that way. It works for anything. And I mean, I didn't have this knowledge until I started reading a book or a court case or, listening to a lecture. And God, with all the technology we have at our fingertips nowadays, if there's a word you don't know, just type it in and say, what does this mean? You know, you can buy dictionaries. You can, God, there's just so much available. It's the only thing you're lacking is the will to do it,
Yeah.
and until you get the willingness to make it important enough in your life that you're going to do it, and things will remain as they are,
Mm.
you know. Before we run out of time, the last thing we wanted you had brought up that I should talk about is, so what do we do with this? And we've kind of been touching on it here in the last few minutes. And I think that's just make up your mind if you want to be involved or not, but I don't remember the movie, but Nora told me about a movie one time where Robin Williams played this part and he had a pack of cigarettes sitting there, and the guy across the table kept looking at it, and he said, well, do you want one? Or no, I'm not a smoker. Well, you keep looking at them, and just decide what you want to be. You either are or you're not. um,
Hmm.
and we got to decide that as people who have lost a loved one to medical negligence. Do I want to get in this fight or not? And if you want to get into it, I'm going to tell you, there's going to be a sacrifice.
Yeah.
Our lives are so busy that it doesn't matter what you add to it, you're going to have to give up something else. It's that simple. And you just got to decide what you're willing to give up in order to dedicate time to this.
And
Um,
our loved ones sacrifice their lives.
yeah, exactly. I believe me, I have those days that I go, I'm not getting anywhere. I'm at the same place I was 4 years ago when all this started, and I will just want to throw up my hands. And then I remember Mom didn't throw up her hands.
Yeah.
She stuck with me until I was able to make it on my own.
Yeah.
And not only do I think I owe that to her, if I'm going to be a good citizen in a civil society, I owe it to the society as well.
Right.
And more people have to think that way.
Yeah. And
Um,
it's a way to honor your mom.
absolutely. You know, we feel we're left feeling like we don't know what to do. And I think this kind of ties in, correct me if I'm wrong, I think this kind of ties into the work that you do, where you find a reason. No, that's not right. Um, you find a way to move on that strengthens you.
Yes.
Is that Is that closer?
Absolutely. And I think, to be fair, when people, and I do a lot of work with trauma, that there is a normal, what I call a victim mode, and that's not us calling them victim, but we feel like a victim. We feel like something has been done to us.
Hmm.
And it takes a while to discover that we still have power in there. There's a lot of grief that has to happen first. And then we move into kind of a survivor mode where we're beginning to get, we're still grieving things, but we're also beginning to see our our power, our empowerment, our autonomy, and how we can make a difference not only in our own life but in the lives of others. And then there's more of a thriver where our experience then becomes about helping others. And each part of that is important, because it is hard when people are in that first stage that they feel powerless and totally overwhelmed by the loss. But like you said, even small things you can do, brochures, you can do this, you can write even if it's a beginning, it begins to shift us into another realm.
I know that in other aspects of my life, we all go through these periods where it seems like you don't ever get a peak. You're just living in this valley and everything goes wrong all the time. It's like, oh God, just can't take. And I found myself from time to time going, I just need one victory. I don't care how big it is. I just need one. And then something will happen. And it's like, okay, that worked. All right, let me move to the next one. And I think what I was trying to say earlier, getting involved in trying to have this law repealed, and then not only repeal the law, but put some things in place to make it where this doesn't happen again. And as you said, honors your past loved one. Uh, that kind of gives you something to get out of bed for,
Mhm.
so to speak.
Oh,
Uh, I'm sure that there has been people that have probably gone into depressions over this stuff and just can't find a reason to even get out of bed. And this is something that a
right.
small step that you can take to do that.
Yes. Just beginning, just beginning with a tiny step.
Yeah. So I guess what some people could do, of course, go back and listen to the other podcasts because they're full of information. But if if you like what's in this podcast, send it to your legislator. Just copy the link, put it in an email to your legislator, send it to your friends and say, look, y'all may not be aware of this law. Tell them a little bit about it. Say, we're trying to get up a force of people to let the legislature know that we're tired of this every year. That they treat it like, you know, they go into each legislative session, saying, well, if we don't win this year, what can we do next? That's just, you're looking for defeat. Go into it and say, no, we're going to solve the problem this year. We're not going to take all your little games and all your little delays and all this stuff. We're going to solve this problem. And if we don't solve this problem, it's time for you to go away, and we'll put new legislators in who will solve this problem because you're clearly not listening to us.
Yeah.
So, well, Missy, do you think I got close to what I was trying to do with this? I wanted to share some information. I want to try to get people to get motivated, and I want to also put in information that legislators can listen to and say, okay, I see what's coming, you know.
Absolutely. I think that today has been really helpful. One of the things I think, as a novice in this particular arena is maybe just reviewing for a moment what subsection 8 is, because there's sort of an assumption we already know what that is. Can you kind of summarize that?
Absolutely. I can quote it in my sleep. Yeah. There is a section of the Florida statutes called the Wrongful Death Act. And what the Wrongful Death Act does, well, it does a number of things, but one of the things it does is it gives you the ability to bring a tort claim or an injury claim against somebody who has done an injury to you. All right. So the medical malpractice part of that, it encompasses, there's a lot in there about medical malpractice. But when you get down to the section of it, statute 768.21 subsection 8, 768.21 describes the damages that can be recovered. And those are economic damages, and there are damages for what's called loss of consortium or companionship. There are even non-economic damages. But then the subsection 8 part of it says anybody who dies because of medical malpractice, if they died without a spouse, or their children are not under the age of 25, nobody in the family, no surviving family member can bring a lawsuit for non-economic damages. In other words, the pain and suffering part of it. You can still sue for economic damages. So if the person died and owned a business and all, you can still, it's not much. And in fact, it's so little that you can sue for that attorneys won't even take the case, because all it does is compensate for the loss. It's nothing more than that. Where attorneys make their money is off of a non-economic damage award, because that is for something that's really intangible. You can't touch it. So an attorney will take the case if he thinks that there's a chance to get non-economic damages. And in some of these cases, that can be, $1 million, 2 million, sometimes $5 million, sometimes only 500,000, but there's enough there for him to take the case. Well, this subsection 8 part of it says that, if you fit this certain category, which the legislature created, they carved out that group of people from society and said, you can't sue for non-economic damages. And their reason for that is these people in that group were going to have to lose a right that everybody else had, so that there would be enough doctors in the state to take care of everyone. So think of it like these people in that legislatively created group are shouldering the burden for everybody else in the state. Let that sink in and ask yourself, we've been under this load for 35 years. How much longer are we going to bear this load without requiring the state to prove that there's a lack of doctors in the state?
Mm.
Because when you go to the Department of Health and you download their annual workforce survey and you take the numbers from their own statistics and create your own charts with them, you'll find out that there are more doctors per capita in 2023, because that was the last year that they were available, than there was in 1990 when this law was passed. Now that's with the population going up, that there are more doctors now. So, like Justice Perriente argued back in 19, or in, what was that, a 2000 case, I guess it was, Ms. Rahi. She said, we don't know if the crisis ever existed to begin with. And if it did, then does it exist today? and she encouraged the legislature 24 years ago. You need to go back and study this. You denied certain citizens a right, and you can't do that for very long. At some point, you got to go back and look at it again and say, do we still have a compelling interest to deny these people access to court? Does that clarify it?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. Thank you.
I told you I could quote it in my sleep.
You can.
Well, Missy, thank you so much for talking to me today about this. You've really helped me. It's easier to have a conversation with somebody and get the points out than for me to just sit here and talk. And you're a lot nicer to look at than I am. So hopefully more people will tune in. Hang on a minute, and I'm going to end the recording, and then I'll chat with you for a few more minutes. Everybody, like, subscribe, tell your friends, send the link, do all of that. Just get involved. Oh, no! I hit the wrong one. Wait a minute. Cancel. Oh, I hate when I do that.